Constitution of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Before the Constitution of the United States, there's this time that they don't really talk about in most history classes, especially in public
You
education.
mean the Articles of Confederation?
Yes, the Articles of Confederation that were between the end of the war and
The Revolutionary War.
the war, yeah, the Revolutionary War and the Constitution, because during the Articles of Confederation, they realized the central government was too weak to actually continue as one nation, and so they rewrote or they remade it as under the Constitution, and then George Washington was elected president. The Articles of Confederation lasted from 1781 to 1789, and there were 10 presidents under that who were elected, and their title was Presidents of the United States in Congress Assembled. Two of them are names that will stand out for you. John Hancock, who has a famous signature somewhere. A few people might from the Declaration of Independence. And another was Richard Henry Lee, whose grandson was Robert E. Lee from the Civil War. And the others, Samuel Huntington, Thomas McKean, John Hanson, Elias Boudinot, Thomas Mifflin, Nathaniel Gorham, and Arthur St. Clair and Cyrus Griffin, all had various lengths of terms under the Articles of Confederation as President of the United States. However,
Well, they were really president of the Congress.
well, no, Presidents of the Continental Congress, that was before the Articles of Confederation, actually. And those guys were elected by the Congress, whereas the ones under the Articles of Confederation were actually elected. Further, they just had they were mostly a figurehead. And so it's in that whole time of Articles of Confederation, it was barely taught in school. This is when I actually have joked about if I ever wrote a book. Like I've joked about and talked, well, half seriously talked about writing a book on these because it's a very unknown thing, and I love history so much, and it's fascinating to me, and it's something that's not just untaught, or not taught, but is ignored.
Well, it's because I think a lot of people want to look at least from a historical standpoint, they want to sit there and say, well, yeah, we had the Articles of Confederation, but we're not talking about it because, the great central government of the United States wasn't put together then.
Yeah.
And one of the concerns that Patrick Henry had about the Constitution, which was also one of the reasons why he was against the Constitution until the Bill of Rights was put in place, was he didn't he thought that it made the central government too strong.
Yeah. And a lot of it was reaction to how weak the government had been under the Articles of Confederation, where
Well,
there was no power to it, basically.
yeah, and a part of that was, if I'm not mistaken from the thinking of it, was because they didn't want a really, really, really strong, federal government. They thought that they would be able to put together everything, or the individual states would be able to get along with each other. Now, part of that problem was, I think it was Maryland and Virginia almost declared war on each other.
Gotta love that.
I think. So it wasn't exactly easy putting it together. But at the same time, you've got to wonder if that was the correct if that was kind of the correct way to go, if there was a way to reform the Articles of Confederation instead of just coming up with the Constitution.
Yeah. It's one of those
yes,
things.
Yes, I'm going all anti-federalist libertarian again.
I need to correct myself. I said, yes, never mind. I'm going to stop, not correct myself. But... Sorry. I'm confusing myself. Don't worry. It's all good. But yeah, no. This is just something I mean, it's fun to talk about a lot, especially if you're like you and I, and we're fascinated by it. It's like, what was really going through the founding fathers' minds when they were, during that time period, when they were, first made the Articles of Confederation and then changed it to the Constitution. Obviously, they had this, we need something stronger, more central than the Articles, but how many of them were actually okay with the Articles of Confederation, or I'm sorry, with the Constitution giving such a strong central government, especially since it didn't necessarily grant one, but it didn't fully deny one. As clearly we see now is the government's taken every little bit and then some of what was specifically denied it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there was a way to discuss it, and it just kind of went a little bit further than they meant it to go. And again, that's the problem of letting it go too far, letting national power go too far.
Yeah.
Which was kind of amusing, because if you look at the Articles of Confederation, it actually said that no states were permitted to leave the Union, which is amusingly not put in the U.S. Constitution.
And yet it was under the U.S. Constitution that we fought a war over that.
Yes.
Yes. Yet there are two states that have the right to leave.
Although, amusingly, in 1869, in the Texas versus White case, it was actually ruled that if you join the Union, you can't leave.
Yeah. Which is ironic timing. But, yes, of course, there are two states that do have in their state constitutions that they're allowed to leave. Can you name those?
Which would be?
Texas and California.
If California left, I don't think anybody would complain.
But yeah, the two states that were their own countries for a bit before they joined the Union, that still have in their constitutions that they can leave. I don't ever see that necessarily happening, even in the case of Texas. But I mean, we all know it's South Carolina that leaves first anyways. So some sadder news that I definitely want to make sure we get to tonight is in Australia right now, they're still dealing, we talked about it on the show before actually, with massive fires in southern Australia, mostly in New South Wales, South Australia, and Victoria. In fact, some of the ones in Victoria have gotten into the suburbs of Melbourne. And the state of Victoria has 70 fires on its own that are burning. And 6,000 firefighters are battling these more than 100 fires going on across the country, with emergency warnings all over the place, and dry conditions, high temps, and strong winds just make firefighters. So far, they've been able to save all but one person. There's been injuries to firefighters and a couple civilians who tried to fight the fires on their own. That was the one death that occurred was someone that tried fighting the fire. But yeah, just prayers with the Australians as they continue to deal with this horrendous fire season they've had this year. But and meanwhile, in Japan, they had the worst snowstorm in 20 years that brought over a foot in some areas and had killed 5 people and injured over 600. Most of those were in traffic accidents as people just didn't know what to do with the conditions. And the snow kept falling until this afternoon, actually. But, yeah. Here we have, Australia dealing with massive fires and Japan getting the worst snowstorm in 20 years.
When you look at that sort of thing, what do you think is causing that? I mean, although, well, in Australia right now, it's summer.
Yeah, it's summer in Australia and it's winter in Japan. Yeah, and that's what's causing it pretty much. I mean, the conditions in Australia just dry, and the conditions in Japan are anything but. They've had a lot of flooding during the fall and summer. They had a lot of flooding there. So, it's just the joys of the weather cycle. The other big news in Japan right now is today they had their mayoral elections in Tokyo. And Yoshi Masuzu, I apologize, I probably said that wrong. I'm not a Japanese expert. They elected him. He's a former cabinet minister. He took over 30% of the vote, beating out 15 other candidates. So out of 16 people, he got 30% of the vote. That's sort of decisive. The big thing with him is he is a strong advocate of nuclear power, while his 2 main opponents were against it. And this is while Japan's dealt over the last few years with the public fallout of the nuclear disaster after the tsunami caused flooding. And it seems the people of Tokyo have decided they want a candidate who will continue to get back to nuclear energy and possibly expand it. Quite an interesting thing when it seems we've been hearing a lot about how as the country doesn't want part of it. He's also very likely expected to continue the pushing that Tokyo and the rest of Japan has done to fight for their ownership of the islands that China keeps trying to claim as their own. The islands, Korea and Taiwan also claim the islands. I should say South Korea. But Japan has legal ownership of them for going back centuries. A private Japanese family had owned them, and Japan last year the country bought them from the family so that they could prove they're Japanese. It's been a conflict that's involved U.S. warplanes, even with the U.S. China claiming them as Japanese territory. However, and then the U.S. overflew them, but then our Grand President Obama apologized to China for encroaching on their airspace while stating that we would continue to defend Japanese territory. But now this mayor, he seems like he'll definitely, all the more so, be supporting of Japan's claims to those islands, which seems a good sign in the face of Chinese declaring islands all over the eastern Pacific Rim to be theirs. They've had spats with Philippines and Indonesia in the south as well over islands down there, which are all owned by the other countries. However, China even with redrew maps, that they're